Hello, and welcome to another edition of Extraordinary Connection. My name is Pastor Kayla Rose, and I serve Freeland United Methodist Church. It's good to be here with you today. This is not my normal setting when I'm streaming outside. Tonight, I'm coming to you from my parents' backyard where I have pitched a tent for a couple of days. And in front of me, I've camped out in the fire pit that my parents have recently built, as this is their new home for this next chapter in their lives as they've moved closer to be with my older brothers, closer to better medical area, and closer to their grandchildren. So I am celebrating having some time with them this weekend, getting away to find some rest and recuperation for me and my soul, as well as taking time to be present with family. It's been very challenging, as you know, for all of us to be in this time of COVID and not have our normal family routines. And so I'm getting back to some basics this weekend of doing a fun summer thing that I love, which is camp. Even if it is in my parents' backyard, their house is quite a distance away from me yet. Like it's enough to practice social distancing and only use the bathrooms when needed, and know that they will be around the campfire with me as soon as we get that set up. But wanted to share a word with you today about the scripture that I'm preparing to preach on Sunday. There's a lot of things that are going on in the scripture that is in the lectionary and the gospel reading this week. Lots of things that it could be preached on. And as I share with you tonight, the verse that I want to focus on is one specific one, but I'll read the whole passage so you have the greater context. The scripture from the Gospel of Matthew for Sunday and for this devotion is coming to you from Matthew 14, starting at verse 22. I'm going to switch my hands here. That's the chair creaking as I sit in it. Hear these words. Right then, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side of the lake while he dismissed the crowds. When he sent them away, he went up to a mountain by himself to pray. Evening came and he was alone. Meanwhile, the boat, fighting a strong headwind, was battered by the waves and was already far away from the land. Very early in the morning, he came to his disciples walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" They were so frightened that they screamed. Just then Jesus spoke to them, "Be encouraged, it's me. Don't be afraid." Peter replied, "Lord, if it's you, order me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." Then Peter got out of the boat and was walking on the water toward Jesus. But when Peter saw the strong wind, he became frightened. As he began to sink, he shouted, "Lord, rescue me." Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him, saying, "You man of weak faith, why did you begin to have doubts?" When they got into the boat, the wind settled down. Then those in the boat worshiped Jesus and said, "You must be God's son." Friends, today I want to focus on verse 27, those words that Jesus spoke to his disciples in the boat amidst the storm, amidst this difficult time that they were experiencing out on the Sea of Galilee, as he was preparing to send them off to the other side of the lake yet again to do ministry, while he went up to pray. This verse 27, "Be encouraged, it's me. Don't be afraid," are words that I think we need to hear every day, especially in this crazy COVID season that we have been in. Be encouraged, it's me. Don't be afraid. There's a lot of fear in our world today. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of unknowns. It's a very challenging time. There were a lot of uncertainties for the disciples on the boat that day, that evening, that early morning. as the wind started gushing down from the Golan Heights and through the valley of Galilee out into the water, making the waves very rocky. And I imagine that there was also thunder and lightning. And if any of you have been to Israel and to Galilee, you know that that water, it gets windy out there. It's not that big of a lake, but it gets windy when a storm comes in. The first time I was there, it got very windy when it was rainy, and it was reminiscent of the scripture to some extent, but I imagine that this passage had much more magnitude for a storm. But I can imagine that it got thick pretty quick with big waves. Water is so unpredictable. And yet Jesus still comes to his disciples, still comes to his friends, just as Jesus still comes to each of us in our anxieties, in our own personal storms. God is still with us, and God still whispers these words through Jesus, not just in the scripture, but in our ears. The question is, are we listening, and are we relying and resting in these words? Be encouraged. Are we encouraged by these words? Do not be afraid. It is I. Be encouraged. It's me. Don't be afraid. Many of you may have received word about your kids or grandkids, or maybe even great-grandkids or students, or from your administration at school, that you've heard the news about school. I just want to sit with that for a second, because as I read it as a pastor with no kids, my heart's breaking. My heart's breaking for my niece and my nephews as they are entering a world of school that does not make sense, as my brother works in the basement and my sister works upstairs on the first level, and the kids are somewhere in the house doing their digital learning. It's very interesting times, very uncertain times, and yet we still hear these words echoed of do not be afraid. Be encouraged. It's me. Do not be afraid. God is in this with us, friends. May we hear those words. May we know that God's voice and God's presence is whispering it to us each day. May it calm and soothe our souls just as Jesus calmed those waters that day. May you find ways to hear those words as you go about your day, as you prepare for a new school year, as you prepare to be in the world wherever God takes you today. Be well.